Yeah. I did not need to hear that.
All right. Well, send my gratitude and my thanks and my blessing to my teachers, and particularly tonight to Gwilym Morus-Baird, who's a scholar and storyteller in Wales, who helped me learn this story, and to Robin Williamson, the Scottish storyteller, who's a true Taliesin, and I humbly ask the story to make itself known here in whatever fashion that it needs to be, that it wants to be, and I invite the half-truth, the half-baked, half-finished version of a story that would take 1,000 years to learn the right way. And I invite you all out of this time into some once upon a time, or once upon a time before time, when time was twinkling starlight and not marching seconds, when time was a river instead of an arrow, to an island wreathed in mist, heavy and happy with apples at all times of the year. And I invite you to the tip of the pen of a Welsh monk in the 14th century, and up through his pen and into his mind, and out past his mind to where the story resided before he got hold of it. And I invite the spirits from that version of the story to make themselves known to us. And we find ourselves in a kingdom far progressed from where we were last month. Last month, a sword stood in a stone in London and waited for the rightful king of the island. And to hear some people tell it, a young child whose brother had forgotten his sword for a tournament grabbed this sword and pulled it from the stone like a knife from butter, where the strongest man in the kingdom had been trying for months and months and months. And through whatever means, maybe we'll learn later, this young boy, whose name was Gwilym at the time, who became Arthur, became the king of the Island of the Mighty, which is one of the oldest names of England. Albion, the Island of Apples, the Island of Gramarye. And his reign in this kingdom, if you listen to the bards tell it, was filled with golden honey. You just saw everything through a honey lens in Arthur's reign. And in this story, which is the oldest story that features King Arthur, we find ourselves in Wales, in a town called, or a spot called Caerleon on the River Usk, and the River Usk comes down from Snowdonia through the whole of Wales and makes its way into the sea at the Severn estuary, which is right where England and Wales meet each other. And we're in the far west. And across the water you can see Ireland if it is a clear day, which are few and far between if you've been to Wales. And in this kingdom, in these kingdoms, these intersecting kingdoms, Arthur reigns. And somewhere to the north and the west of Arthur's reign, there is a lord named Culhwch who is married to a woman named Gwilym. And Gwilym becomes pregnant. And in her pregnancy, it is says that her mind went wandering and her body followed. And she found herself wandering in spiral circuits around the countryside of Wales, pregnant with a baby, until she found herself living among a herd of pigs in the woods of Wales. And it is inside of that herd of pigs, of swine, that she gave birth to her son, who was given the name Culhwch. And Culhwch means the pigs run. And Culhwch was born there, among the swine in the woods of Wales. Shortly after Culhwch's birth, he spent his first day living with his brothers and sisters among the pigs. They were found by a swineherd and taken back to court. And there, reunited with their father, with the father and the husband, joyful harmony ensued in the kingdom, in the beautiful shining face of this boy, Culhwch, who was born among the pigs. And in that shiny, golden, solar light of that newborn family, the shadow creeps in again, as it always does, and the mother, Gwilym, becomes mortally ill and soon perishes, leaving the king and his son alone. But just before she died, she said this. She said this to her husband: "Promise me you will not marry until a twin-headed briar rose grows upon my grave. Promise me you will not marry again until a twin-headed briar rose grows upon my grave." And he promises, as I think we all would do on the deathbed of our love. Little did he know that secretly she had enlisted her tutor from her youth to go out to her grave every morning for the rest of his life and cut the rose bush to the ground. So, after her death and her burial, he does what he says he will do. And for 7 years, every single day, the tutor goes out and cuts the rose bush to the ground so that it can never grow. And for 7 years, Culhwch's father keeps his deal. He's made this promise, this destiny that he has taken on him is geish. It's an Irish word for a spell that has you do a thing. And then, in the 7th year, the teacher forgets to trim the rose. And day after day, Culhwch's father goes to the grave of his wife, Gwilym, and each day the rose has grown a little bit more and more and more, until at the end of the 7th year, indeed, 2 of the most blushing pink roses, twins on a stem, grow on the grave of his love, Gwilym. And it's hard to tell in these stories where love and political obligation tie with each other or go against each other, but something has him decide that it's time for him to seek a new wife. And so he goes to his counselors, and they tell him this: "Well, I've heard that the wife of King Doged, who lives just the next kingdom over, is the most incredibly beautiful woman in all of the island of the mighty. I think you should marry her." Now we're talking about the wife of a living king. in a very, we come to find out, a very prosperous kingdom next door. And so the men of the Cantref, which is a kingdom in Welsh, come together and put together a war party and go and make war on the kingdom of King Doged. And they kill him on the field. Remember, last month the battle took days and days and days, and half of the forces of the island died, and blood was fertilizing the fields. But in this story, we don't go that far, I don't think, unless we'd like to. But war ensues, and they kill King Doged, and his wife is married to Culhwch's father, whose name I could pronounce when we started the story and now has eluded me. Culhwch, I think, is his name. Welsh names are really hard. And King Doged's wife, who they don't name in the story, and her daughter come to the kingdom of Culhwch's father. And Culhwch is sent away to be fostered when this happens, with another highborn family. And life ensues, and this marriage, this political marriage, starts to deepen, and the wife and Culhwch's father begin to connect, and this daughter is there, and things begin to ease back into some sense of normalcy. And one day, the stepmother is what I'll decide to call her because she's not given a name. The stepmother goes to the oldest midwife in the kingdom and says to her this: "It is such a shame that my husband is so powerful and so handsome and so incredible, but that he has no heirs. He must be infertile. This is a problem. Because if my line is going to continue, if I'm going to be taken care of, we need an heir." And the old woman looks at her and says, "You've got this all wrong. Fertility is not the problem. In fact, he will have an heir, and possibly by you. I know it." And she stops, and then she says, "Don't you know about Culhwch? Don't you know about Culhwch?" She says, "Who?" She says, "The king's son, Culhwch." She says, "No, of course I don't know about Culhwch. I wouldn't be here saying there's no heirs if I knew about an heir." And so she storms home, and she goes to her husband and says, "Why have you hid your son from me all of this time? Why don't you talk about him?" And this is his response: "I'll tell you about him now." And then he doesn't say anything. He just sends for his son to return home. He says nothing about his son or his conception with the pigs of the forests of Wales. He sends for his son, and his son comes home and is integrated into family life. And the source is silent a little bit on what happens here. But one day the stepmother comes to Culhwch and says this: "You're a handsome young man, and you have no wife. Why don't you marry my daughter? You're a perfect match. You're the same age. You're both beautiful. It'll be a perfect political alliance. It will keep this all going together." And he says, No. I have no interest in women. I have no interest in marrying your daughter. It's too weird. She's my sister. It's not going to happen." And she points her finger in his face and says this: "I lay a curse upon you, Culhwch. I lay a curse upon you. You will never feel the touch of a woman's skin until you marry Olwen, daughter of Ysbyddaden, king of all giants. You will not feel the touch of a woman's skin until you marry Olwen, the daughter of Ysbyddaden, king of all giants." And in that moment, Culhwch's cheeks blushed like the roses on his mother's grave. Twin roses blushed on his face. And it is said that from that time on, he blushed continuously with the weight of longing for Olwen that entered into his body. This transformation, this rite of passage, if we're going to say it, happens in this moment with this curse. I curse you, and the blush. And so his father notices the blush and says, Culhwch, what has changed in you? You blush always. And he says this, Father, I long to marry Olwen, the daughter of Ysbyddaden and king of all giants, and I know it is impossible. I know it is impossible, but I long to marry her. And his father says this, nothing is impossible for you, my son, because you are the cousin of King Arthur. And if you go to Arthur and ask for what you really want, he will. Pretty cool. And so Culhwch prepares for the journey, and he mounts upon his steed. And he goes off from his kingdom back to, remember, we're at Caerleon on Usk. This is where Camelot lives in this story. And he rides his horse. And this is what the sources have to say about Culhwch. Culhwch rode off on a young gray steed, of fiery eye, of graceful pace. Gold, not leather, about its head. Gold, not leather, its saddle was. And Culhwch bore 2 silver spears, his sword in hand, an arm's length. It would wound the wind, and swifter drop than drops the wettest dew of June. On Culhwch's hip, gold hilted, a gold-edged sword with a gold cross on it, many jeweled as the midnight sky. Moon-white its ivory grip. By Culhwch there ran 2 dappled hounds, red gold collars from shoulder to ear. The dog on the left would leap to the right, and the dog on the right would leap to the left. Like 2 wild swallows they sported round him. The 4 hooves of Culhwch's steed would hurl 4 clods of soil above Culhwch's head, like 4 of summer's swooping swallows. A purple 4-cornered cloak he wore, a red gold apple at every corner, each apple worth 100 cows. The gold in his soft boots and lacings, from knob to knee to the nail of his toe, 300 cows would buy. So easily the steed moved under him. No curl of Culhwch's hair was stirred, nor even the least tip of one hair. And so riding, Culhwch came to Arthur's gate. He galloped across the land in this state. Can you imagine it? No stirring, except for the earth become birds above his head, riding to the gate of Arthur. And he rides to the gate, the closed gate of Camelot, in this fashion, and yells this, "Is there a gatekeeper?" And he hears back, "You should be beheaded for asking such a dumb question." And the gatekeeper begins like this again. He says, "No one gets in unless they're the son of a king or they have a craft." Culhwch says, "Well, I have no craft." I have no craft. And he says this, well, no one gets in tonight because fork and knife have gone into meat, and mead has gone into drinking horn, and the bard is telling a story. So go down the road to the tavern. You'll have meat and drink and company enough there. And Culhwch calls back to the gatekeeper, I'm not going anywhere. I came to see Arthur. You tell him I'm here. He says, who are you? Culhwch, son of Culhwch. I've never heard of you, says the gatekeeper. And it begins to pour rain. I forgot to tell you. It begins to pour rain. Culhwch is sopping wet. He was so resplendent. Now he's sopping wet. And the gatekeeper goes back and forth. And funny thing about the gatekeeper is this gatekeeper is only the gatekeeper on the 1st of January. So it gives us a timeline, right? This is the new year. And they're celebrating the new year. And finally, Culhwch, in his fervor, wears the gatekeeper down. And the gatekeeper says, all right, I'll go ask him. And he goes inside. And inside, the scene is incredible. The great long table is set 100 places on each side. Mountains of food, ale and mead flow. And everyone is in rapt silence, listening to the bard play the harp and tell this story. When Arthur was young, just after he pulled the sword from the stone, Merlin and the Lady of the Lake talked, and they said this, Arthur could be a good king and just be the king of the Christians of this island, or Arthur could be a great king and be a king of the land and a king of the political powers. And in order to do that, he needs to be initiated in the old way. And so they made a pact and they made an agreement that when Arthur came of age, they would take him as far north as north could go to the oldest people on the island, and they would initiate him in the old way. And Arthur agreed to this. And so the time came, and the web was woven tight, and the initiation, he was brought to what they call the Island of the Dragon, and brought into this initiation. And when he arrived, the drums were blaring, and the fire was hot, and the night was thick, and he was painted with blue paint, blue woad, and had the horns of the stag mounted upon his head, and was sent out into the forest. And at some moment, a scream of pure springtime flashed through the cold and dark wood. And all of the deer in the wood began to run. And then Arthur ran. And Arthur was a deer, he was a stag, and he was Arthur. And he ran like a stag amongst the deer. And the stag among the deer caught Arthur's scent, and they fought, like twins fighting, like the same person fighting themselves. And Arthur was gored by the tusk of the stag, we're back with the pigs, later, by the horn, the antler of the stag, and bled upon his brother. And he pulled his knife, and he stabbed two in the same spot, and ended the stag's life, and bathed his blue-woad body in the blood of his brother, the king of the deer, and entered into a dream. And in a dream, in a cave, he made love to a goddess, and something came from the land into him, and something went from him into the land, and the pact was sealed. And when he awoke, he lay there in the arms of a woman. And he wasn't a god anymore, and she wasn't a goddess anymore. But they made love again because there was something that compelled them. And then something completely and utterly strange happened. Arthur nuzzled this woman in this pure and childlike way. And in that moment of the story, the gatekeeper bust in loud and said this: "2 parts of my life have gone, and 2 parts of your own. I have been in Caer C and Caer Asi and Sak and Salak and Lotor and Fotor and Greater and Lesser India. I have been in the battle of 2 Inris, when 12 hostages were taken from Lachlan. I have been once in Europe. I have been in Africa, Corsica likewise, in Caer Brithwich and Brithach and Nerthach. I have been at hand when you, Arthur, killed an entire army of Glace, son of Marin, and when you killed Black Mill, son of Dugum. I have been right beside you when you conquered all of Greece. I have been, I declare, in Caer Oeth and Knoweth, the dark prison under the stone, and in Caer Nevenhir of the 9 natures." The spell was broken, and Arthur flicked his head, said, yes, but what news from the gate? Obviously, there's news from the gate if the gatekeeper shows up. And he says, well, I have seen fair lords across all of the world in our grand adventures, my lord Arthur. I have seen fair lords with you in Greece and India and Corsica and France. And I have stood on battlefields with you against resplendent knights, but I have never seen one so incredible as the man that I left standing in the rain at the gate. Never once. I just can see like Arthur's head spinning. Like he's used to this, but it's still a little bit much for him. And Arthur's head is spinning, and he says, "Wait, you left? Let him in! What are you? He's at the gate. Go! If you came here walking, go back running." And he sends the gatekeeper back to the gate to let Culhwch in. Now it was the custom in Camelot, as it should be, that if you entered court, you got the hell off your horse. You walked in, and you did all of the niceties. You were announced. And Culhwch did none of it. He stayed on his horse with the golden bridle and the golden saddle, with his hair now sopping wet but still not stirring, with his two dogs jumping left and right in front of him, and he entered Camelot in the middle of this scene, this great feast, with the bard's spell still hanging thick in the air. People are still in the story, and then suddenly this Culhwch rides in. And everyone is awed. The gatekeeper did not exaggerate despite his nature. And Arthur says to him, "You are indeed the fairest I have ever seen. Come, sit between me and Kai, my closest brother. Sit and enjoy the meat. Give him a plate, give him some mead, and ask for your gift," because it was customary when you came to court for the first time that you would receive a gift. And he said, I have not come to leech your food or to leech your drink. I have not come to receive a gift. I have but one request. And Arthur says this: you may have anything that the 4 winds of the world touch. You may have anything that you could utter from your mouth, from me, except these 3 things, 4 things. My sword, Excalibur in English, in Welsh I cannot pronounce. My dagger, my shield, my shimmering spear, but most of all, my wife, Guinevere. You may not have these things, but anything else the winds touch, anything else touched by the sun's rising, you may have. And he says, Culhwch takes it in. He says, firstly, I would love for you to cut my hair. I would love for you to cut my hair. Now, historical side note, in Welsh culture of the 15th century, and in the laws before, to cut someone's hair was to acknowledge them as your blood kin. You only cut the hair of someone that you were willing to acknowledge was a kin of yours. And so Culhwch asks Arthur, cut my hair. And so Arthur brings out golden scissors and a silver razor and begins to cut the hair of Culhwch. And as he's cutting, he realizes that they must be kin. This magic passes between them, and he says, who are you? Who are you? He says, I am Culhwch, son of Culhwch and Gwilym. And Arthur says, yes, indeed, you are my cousin. You are my cousin. Please let me give you a gift. You are my cousin. Please let me give you a gift. And Culhwch says, okay, here's what I want. I want the hand of Olwen, daughter of Ysbyddaden, king of all giants. And Arthur says, I've never heard of Olwen, and I've never heard of Ysbyddaden, but if I can do it, I will. And he sends all 260 members of the Round Table across the island of the mighty, searching for Olwen, and searching for the kingdom of Ysbyddaden, which none of them have ever heard of. And they search far and wide, and for a year. And no one finds anything. And Culhwch starts to get impatient. So he starts to satirize Arthur and his court all across the land, talking mad shit about Arthur and his court. And Kai comes, Arthur's brother, well, foster brother. Kai comes and puts his hand on Culhwch's shoulder and says, you are too hasty in satirizing our lord. You are too hasty in talking mad shit. Cool it. Either you admit that Olwen doesn't exist, or you come on the quest with us, and you quest until we find her. And so, Arthur commands that Culhwch will be accompanied by 6 fellows to create a fellowship. The first being Kai. And it said of Kai that he could hold his breath for 9 days and 9 nights underwater. That anything he held in a rainstorm would remain dry from the heat of his hand. That his step was lighter than a shadow. With them came Bedwyr, who was the most beautiful man in the kingdom, save Arthur himself. And maybe Culhwch, because they just did that whole thing about how Culhwch was beautiful, but they remained silent on this. With Bedwyr and Kai and Culhwch, Gwilym, the interpreter, went. And Gwilym, the interpreter, it is said that he could speak any language, even the language of the birds, and even the language of the bees and the trees. With them also went the guide, whose name I cannot remember in Welsh now, but someone who could track in any territory as if it was his home. With them went Gwilym, or Gwalchmai, another cousin of Arthur, who never went on a quest that he didn't complete. And lastly, Menu, who knew all forms of magic. And this fellowship of 7 left Caerleon on Usk, or if we want to call it Camelot, we can, together, riding upon their steeds. And they rode west and south across the land until, at some point, they came to a field completely covered in sheep with wool as white as snow, as numerous as the cresting waves of the sea, and as large as draft horses. Huge sheep. Huge sheep. A field of huge sheep. And in their center, a shepherd who wasn't so small himself, and a massive dog. And here is the nature of this shepherd. Every time he breathed, the dried bracken from the year before would catch fire, and he would clear the land. And he never once lost a sheep. And his dog was of the nature to kill any visitor that arrived. And so Kai turns to Gwihir, the one who speaks the languages, and says, well, you're the language guy. You should go talk to this shepherd. And the dog. You go talk to them. And Gwihir says to Kai, well, I've only said I would go as far as you go, so you come with me, and I'll go talk to him. And they both kind of quake in their boots a little bit. And Menu, the one who knows all magic, appears from behind them and says, don't worry, I will lay a spell on the dog, and then we can talk to the shepherd. So he lays a spell on the dog, and the dog falls to sleep. You've ever seen like a really cute sleeping dog, but huge. And they go and they speak to the shepherd, and the shepherd is in the middle of breathing, so something's catching on fire, and he turns around. And the company says to him, whose sheep are these? And he says, these are the sheep of Isbadadin, king of all giants. Whose sheep are you? And they say, we're the messengers of King Arthur. We have come to ask for Olwen's hand for Culhwch, son of Culhwch. Culhwch, son of Culhwch. And he says, oh, my boys, no cock that has crowed on that quest has ever left this kingdom. Go home. Does he know who he's talking to? They say, no, we're serious. We're here for Olwen. We're not leaving without her. And to show their earnestness, Culhwch slips the golden ring off his pinky finger, which was his mother's, and gives it to the shepherd as an act of good faith. And the shepherd takes the tiny little ring and tries to slip it on his huge giant finger. And it doesn't fit, and so he takes off his glove and drops it inside of the pinky hole, the pinky finger glove compartment, and goes home to ponder this request that the messengers of Arthur have made, the sheep of Arthur. And that night, his wife says to him, when she's cleaning his gloves, where'd you get this ring? And here's what he says. Well, I was standing on the seashore, and a really, really beautiful corpse came up on the shore. And, I went and checked out the corpse, and on its pinky finger was this ring. And so I took it. And here we are. Now I have it. Isn't it beautiful? And she knew, in the way that someone that you've been with for a long time knows. She knew that he was full of shit. So she started to, kind of ask some leading questions about the corpse and what it really looked like and which direction it might have blown in from. And finally, he gives in and he tells the story. I met the messengers of Arthur. They're here to get try to figure out how to get Olwen to marry Culhwch, son of Culhwch. And in that moment, his wife's face lights up, because Culhwch is the name of her nephew. Could this be her, she thinks? Well, I must go see. And she goes running to go figure out where they're staying. And they've made this small kind of poacher's camp. And she's running. And from a distance in the firelight, she sees Culhwch's face. And in it, she sees her sister's face. For she is the sister of Gwilym. And she runs faster. And she goes with arms open to hug Culhwch. And Kai steps in the way with a log. He grabs a log from the pile of firewood and puts it between him and this giant woman. And she squeezes the log. And it is said that she squeezed the log so hard that sap ran from it like whey from cheese. She squeezed it so hard in her loving fervor that sap ran from this tried firewood. And Kai says, well, lucky me, I put that between us, because I don't have that much sap. I'd be dead. And she says, somehow they have this whole conversation, and it comes out, I'm your aunt, I'm your aunt, you're my nephew, why are you here, what's going on? And they come back to the house of the shepherd and his wife, and they begin to talk. And while they're talking, she opens a cabinet, and she lets out a little boy with golden hair who comes out of the cabinet. And Kai says, it's a shame that you hide him in a cabinet. And he says, the wife says, Isbadaden has killed my other 23 sons. And the only reason I still have this son is because I hide him in the cabinet. And so Kai says this, send him with me for fostering, and he will never come to harm unless I do. And so the son of Custennin's is the name of the shepherd, goes and leaves with the party when they leave. And the talk continues, and she says, so tell me about this Olwen thing. And Culhwch says, well, I've come to ask for the hand of Olwen. She says, trust me, Isbadaden doesn't know you're here. You should leave now, because this is folly. You will die. And he refuses. He says, I will not leave until I at least see Olwen. How can I see her? She says, okay. I was the nurse to Olwen when she was a child. And she comes here every Saturday to wash my hair. So if you wait until Saturday next, she will come and she will wash my hair, and you will be able to see her. But you must promise that none of you will harm her. And they give their promise, and it happens. And on Saturday, Olwen walks into the shepherd's hut. And this is what is said of Olwen in the source. Olwen's dress was flame red. Red gold and garnets hung about her neck. Yellow her hair, as yellow as the flower of broom. Sea foam no whiter than her white skin. Her fingers white as water flowers. Her eyes bird bright. Her swan white breasts. Her cheeks blush like foxglove flowers. They filled anyone with love of her. 4 clovers sprang in each track where she walked. It was for this that she was called Olwen, which means the white track. And so as she walked across the room, these 4 clovers were popping out on the ground. And Culhwch is hiding, and he sees her. And this blushing love that he's been feeling turns into raging storm as he just falls and falls and falls and falls in love with Olwen. And he bursts out of where he's hiding, and he says, "Olwen, I love you. I've always loved you. Come away with me now." That's really going to work. She's like, "Whoa. First of all, why are you in the cabinet? Second of all, have you met my father? This is not going to work. Don't say things like that to me." But he slows himself down a little bit, and he begins to talk, and he's like, "Well, okay, I'm willing to do this the right way. Let me ask your father." She says, "That's a terrible idea, but let me give you a piece of advice. When you ask my father, promise to give him whatever he asks for. And maybe he won't kill you." That's pretty good advice. And she says this now. "Now that you've talked to me, now that you've started this, he knows you're here. So there's no use hiding in the shepherd's hut. Come to court." And so they follow Olwen in her white track across from the shepherd's hut to the tallest gate in the biggest castle that they've ever seen. All six and Culhwch of these seasoned warriors, these seasoned questers, the biggest castle that they've ever seen, following this white track across the land, this Queen's Road. And out of the gate of the castle comes the most eruptive snoring you've ever heard. And it's almost impossible to walk in the gate when the snorer is breathing out because of this gust of wind, but you're almost pulled in on the in-breath. And they're pulled into the gate, no gatekeeper, pulled into the gate. And in the great hall, a massive, huge being with stone gray skin and a crown on his head lays sleeping with his head upon the throne and his body out of sight. His great beard filled with all sorts of carcasses of living beings in half decay, rippling out like the waves of the sea across the ground, and they pick their way through the hair. And they say, "Isbadaden, king of all giants, we've come to gain the hand of your daughter for Culhwch, son of Culhwch." And "Where are my servants?" the great head says. "Why do I pay anyone if you can just walk in here? Where are my servants?" And no one responds. And they say, "Isbadaden, we're here for the hand of your daughter." And he says, "Well then, grab those pitchforks over there and prop up my eyelids so that I may see my future son-in-law." And so Kai and Bedwyr grab 2 pitchforks and they prop up the great eyelids of Isbadaden so that he can see, for his eyelids are so heavy that he can't lift them on his own. And his stone gray eyes peer out and scan the fellowship. Say, "Which one of you is Culhwch?" And Culhwch presents himself, and then Isbadaden says, "Come back tomorrow!" and knocks the pitchforks out from his eyes, and they close. And so they leave. And as they turn their back, Isbadaden's great hand grabs one of 3 poisonous spears from the wall and hucks it at Culhwch. And Kai grabs it from the air and throws it back at Isbadadin. And Isbadadin says, "Oh! It stings! It stings like a wasp's sting. Curse the person who forged this spear. Every time I walk uphill, I will get indigestion from now on." And they leave. So they come back the next day. "Isbadadin, king of giants, we've come to gain the hand of Olwen for Culhwch, son of Culhwch. Get the forks, prop up my eyes." They prop up his eyes. And he says, "Which one of you is Culhwch?" And Culhwch said, "I am Culhwch." He says, "Come back tomorrow." And as they turn around, he grabs a great poisonous spear and hucks it. And Gwihir, the interpreter, grabs it from the air and throws it back at Isbadadin. And it strikes him in the chest. And he says, "Oh! It stings like a mad dog's bite. Curse the man who forged that spear. I will never breathe the same again." And they leave. The next day, they come back. Same thing. Props up his eyes. Says, "Which one of you is Culhwch?" Getting the whole thing here. Says, "I am Culhwch, and I've come for the hand of your daughter." He says, "It's not gonna happen, but you can come back tomorrow." And he grabs the spear, again, chucks it, and this time Culhwch grabs the spear from the air and flings it back at Isbadadin. And it strikes Isbadadin in the eye. And Isbadadin says, "Oh! It stings like a paper cut. I will never see the same again, and I will always have madness at noon." And they leave and come back the next day. So we're 4 days in. The same thing. And they walk up and they prop up his eyes. And he says this, "Let me see my future son-in-law." And then he says, "If you are to marry my daughter, here is the things I need from you." And he begins to list impossible task after impossible task. And there's so many impossible tasks that if I tried to remember them, my brain would turn to Joey. Because I tried. I have a partially jellified brain. But among them, a field of flax must be planted, that by high noon tomorrow would yield enough flax for a black and white wedding dress for my daughter, Olwen. And you must get the greatest sower and the greatest reaper from all of history to come and sow and reap. And you must get honey 9 times sweeter than any honey in this land. Honey that glints so bright as the precious one's eye before creation. You must get the greatest hunting dog in all the land. And each task, Culhwch says this, "You might think it's difficult, but I can do it." Each time. And Isbadadin says back to him, "Well, you might think it's easy, but here's another one." And they go on this way for days. And one of the central tasks is to find Mabon, son of Modron, the oldest prisoner in the world, who was stolen from between his mother and the wall at the age of 3 days old. And then you must find the Turk Truith, the great boar demon who lives on the accursed ridge of Ireland, and get the golden comb and the golden shears and the golden... There's 3 things: shears, comb, and knife that hang between his ferocious tusks, and bring them back and shave my beard so that I may be clean shaven for the wedding of my daughter. And the impossible tasks continue, and at the end of them, Culhwch says just this: "That will be easy, even though you think I can't do it." And he says, Isbadden says, "Okay, well, I'll see you when you do it." And he sends, and the company leaves. And they return to Arthur, and they list the impossible tasks, because their brains could handle it, unlike mine. And they list every single task. And they decide to send all 260 members of the court of Arthur out across the land to start to work through the tasks, one by one by one by one. But Culhwch and the fellowship decide to find Mabon, son of Modron, who is the oldest prisoner in the world, who was stolen from between his mother and the wall at the age of 3 days old. And so, being the smart fellows that they are, they decide to seek out the oldest animal in the kingdom. And the oldest animal in the kingdom, according to their knowledge, is a blackbird, the blackbird of Siligway, who lives in the heart of the forest. And so they go and they find this blackbird, and they ask, "Blackbird, do you know of Mabon, son of Modron, who was stolen from between his mother and the wall at the age of 3 days old?" The blackbird says this: "I have been here for so long. When I first arrived, there was an anvil in the wood. And every day I would strike my beak upon the anvil to keep it sharp. And as we stand here now, there is nothing more than a kernel of steel left. And in all the time that I have been in this wood, I have never heard the name Mabon, son of Modron. But seeing as you are the messengers of Arthur, I will take you to one older than I, who may know the answer." And so the blackbird guides them to the top of the mountain, where a stag lives. The stag of the mountain lives. And they say, "Stag of the mountain, do you know of Mabon, son of Modron, who was stolen from between his mother and the wall at the age of 3 days old?" And the stag says this: "When I came here, I had but one pointed antler. And now the forest is littered with my 9-tined racks from all of my seasons. And in all of my life, I have never heard of Mabon, son of Modron. But since you are the men of Arthur, I will lead you to one older than I, who might know the answer." And so he leads them to the eagle of Gwrneby. And they say again, "Do you know of Mabon?" He says, "No." He says this: "I have lived here for so long that this rock that I stand upon, that is a mere hand size, was once a great boulder, and has been worn down by my talons simply grasping it. And never once have I heard the name Mabon, son of Modron. But once I was fishing in the nearby lake, and my talons grasped upon the back of a salmon. So thick was the salmon's hide that my talons got stuck and I was sucked down underneath the lake. And in the bottom of that lake, the salmon whispered to me, "I am older than you, even, eagle. And I know things that you will never know here in my home. And something tells me that the salmon might know. And he happens to be a friend of mine. One time I took a spear from his back after that, and now we're good." And so the eagle of Gordoby took him to the salmon, the oldest being in existence. Truly. And on the shore of the lake, the great salmon's head came out of the water, and they said, "Salmon of the lake, do you know of Mabon, son of Modron?" And the salmon said, "Indeed, I do not. But every year I swim from this lake down to the sea. And there I pass a castle under the water, so old and so perilous that even I refuse to enter. And emanating from that castle is a song so mournful and so ancient that it could only be the song of the one you are looking for. Climb upon my back, and I will take you there." And so the fellowship jump on the back of this ancient salmon and dive under the lake and follow the ways of the water down to the sea. And there, under the ocean, this great castle. And they hear it, the song so mournful and so lamenting that it could only be the being who had been imprisoned since the beginning of time, lamenting in this castle under the sea. And somehow Kai is able to speak to Mabon through the wall and ask, "Is it you? Are you the one we seek, Mabon, son of Modron?" "Indeed I am." So somehow they get word to Arthur, and Arthur comes in his ship Predwen, full of warriors, and they lay siege to the castle. And it is impossible to siege the castle at the heart of the sea. But in the distraction, Kai is able to slip his way through the gate and release Mabon from his imprisonment and take him back with them to the island of the mighty. And while this all was happening, quest after quest after quest after quest was being accomplished all over the land. And when they returned with Mabon, the last quest that had to be accomplished was the receiving of the golden shears and the golden comb and the golden knife from the Turk Truith, the pig demon, the boar demon who lives on the accursed ridge in Ireland. And when they set sail to Ireland, they could see the fires of destruction rippling out in rings from the accursed ridge, from where the pig, Turk Truith, and his 7 piglets raided and destroyed the land. And so they went to the heart of the spiral of fire, and they engaged with the Turk Truith, attempting to get the shears and the comb, to no avail. They even aligned with the kings of Ireland and the kings of Brittany, and all 3 forces came against the demon pig, and not one was able to get close enough to grab the shears or the comb or the knife. And the battle raged for so long, that this pig demon realized that it was Arthur and the men from the island of the mighty who were causing him all this trouble like mosquitoes, and decided to take this war to their turf and crossed the sea, chased in boats by the men from the island of the mighty, and began to wreak the same destruction on Britain as it was happening in Ireland. And this time it hit home because men from the court of Arthur began to fall in the battle. Things are falling, dying, and the fighting got more and more intense, and the countryside of England and Wales began to burn. And at one point, they were able to back the Turk Truith up into the sea, and it lost its footing, and they were able to grab the shears from its head. And then it got its footing back, and it ran across the land, and there was no way to catch it. And all the way across Wales, and then finally able to back it up into the sea again and grab the comb from its head. And then it got free. And finally, after killing all 7 of the Turk Truith's piglets and backing it again into the estuary of the Severn where this all began, they were able to grab the knife from the Turk Truith's head before the Turk Truith turned and ran into the sea to be seen again at some other point in time. And with the completing of that quest, they went back to the court of Isbaddaden, king of giants, with all of the great treasures he had requested, the 9 times sweeter honey, the comb and the knife, the flax seeds. There's an amazing scene where they go down into an ant hill, and the ants agree to help them plant and harvest the seeds. And they have all of the things. And they come with the comb and the shears and the knife. And they come and they shave Isbaddaden's face clean for the day of his wedding. And in that shaving and in the cutting of Isbaddaden's hair, Isbaddaden says this to Culhwch: "As soon as my daughter marries you, I will die. As soon as my daughter marries you, I will die. And I want you to know that you could never have done this without Arthur. This would never have happened without Arthur. You did not do this alone. And if you want to know who Arthur serves, look no further." And then he commands that they cut off his head and end his life before the wedding, taking his life into his own hands. And they behead Isbaddaden. And I like to think, like other heads of giants in these stories, they took his head somewhere and it spoke prophecy. Because that's what happens to heads of giants in Welsh stories. And Culhwch and Olwen were married in the most beautiful and incredible ceremony you could possibly imagine. Her white and black wedding dress. The mead was sweeter than any mead you've ever tried. The music was so incredible. Mabon, son of Modron, even sang a few songs that led everyone weeping. And I was there, and you were there, and we still are, because weddings like that go on for years. And somewhere at the heart of it all, a split was healed, and I'll let you decide what it was. And that's the end of that story. So I invite you to take the huge thing that was and just put it to the side. And to search inside of yourself for the one thing that's stuck in you, like an acupuncture point or an elf dart. Some place in your body, some image from the tale. Some feeling you had, something I didn't say that came into your mind. Some sound you heard from the night. And what we're going to do in honor of one of the great storytellers, Danny Deerdorf, is we're going to feed this story back. And the idea is that we just got fed by the story. And if you don't feed the story with the images, it will find something to eat. And sometimes that's you. So this is reciprocity practice. And I invite you to maybe, if you're in the chat, you can put it in the chat if you're on the Zoom. And if you're here in person, you can just feed it out loud if you feel called, and maybe someone can help guide it.
Sarah says, into the water to feel the fire. I'm seeing young Arthur, perhaps before his name is Arthur, into the moon and being covered in the blood of his brother, with a tusk antler in his side. His hair covered in the blood of his brother, Culhwch, with initiation.
The blackbird sharpening their beak on the anvil for so long that it became just a sliver of steel, and the mud of the horse becoming swallowed. The ancient underwater castle with the mournful song. The beard of corpses. Olwen's tracks of clover. Still at the wedding that never ends. The longing of two roses.
Sarah says, the multiple stings that is bedadding took without punishing anyone.
Yeah, I'm with the being born in the pigs and then the great pig beast at the end. And I'm with the kind of kindred energy between Arthur cutting Skillet's hair and then Culhwch shaving Isteden's beard.
The curse that put the blushing roses. Yeah, that seems to be with a lot of us. Blushing cheeks and roses, the twin roses on the grave. I love that I can't tell what size everybody is.
Thank you for all of that. I pray that the story is well nourished and that we don't take anyone home with us that we're not ready to take home with us. And ready to do one last thing before we close. So if you show me your hands like this, this is something I learned from my teacher Martin Shaw. That's like an old storytelling ritual from Devon. So imagine that in each of your hands you have a golden apple, and maybe tonight they're silver apples of the moon if we're gonna connect with that Yeats poem. And in your right hand, this apple is for me, the storyteller. It's a gift, because I fed you. And in the center, there's an apple that's yours, that's always been there from before you had a name, and will be there again when your name becomes all things. And in your left hand, there's another apple, and that apple's for the story. And what we're going to do on the count of 3 is we're going to put this apple that's for me on the ground, and I'll come collect them later. And we're going to shuck this apple that's in our left hand over our right shoulder as a ritual closing of the space and a feeding of the story. We're going to send all those images that we just wove together on this apple flying out into the night. You ready? Really get that apple in your hand. It's weight. It's got heft. 1, 2, 3. Thanks, everybody. Thanks. How do you leave? There goes Nan.